doing?
Yeah, good. Good morning.
Thank you. I was just saying that the sun has not even come up here yet. So I'm still like a little bit asleep, and you guys have had a full day already. So I've got my morning coffee.
Yeah, just a second, let me grab mine.
Yeah, your evening coffee set up here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I think we'll probably do a little sound check in a second anyway, but I can hear you, all of you. Have you all been using a lot of Zooms for your classes?
Yeah, we have.
All day, ma'am.
How's that going?
It's good, but we do miss being on not being able to be on campus.
I know, it's very different. It's unusual, but I guess we're all trying to make the best of it.
Yeah.
Are there any things that are improved by doing it this way? Any sort of silver linings to this situation?
Dave sir will tell you.
What?
Oh. Yeah, to be honest, Cindy, I'm just loving it.
I don't miss my commute to work. I don't miss having to park and, drive to campus. It's kind of nice to have had this time to stay home. And I'm on sabbatical this semester. And so I was going to travel, but that isn't happening. But the interviews that I'm doing with people are very productive because they're also at home. So they're not getting interrupted by coworkers, and I'm having really nice engaged conversations with people that I'm able to record for my research, which I'll talk a little bit more about.
But teaching wise, and I think this has opened up a lot of opportunities for us to be more creative. That's my experience, because it's a very complete, it's a very different, and I find that's my personal opinion. I don't know, they have to tell what they think about it. They might have different opinion about this.
That's why I was asking them when you were away. I'm kidding.
Nikita, come on.
So they didn't say bad things about you.
I missed that conversation. I just missed that conversation.
Well, I'm hearing everything, Dave. Don't worry.
Yeah. Let me just.
It's being recorded.
It's being recorded, right? It's being recorded.
It says recording.
Yes, it's recording, man.
Yeah.
But the thing is, well, the way I look at it, because I'm able to pay them personal attention because they are in their comfort zones and they are on their very personal devices. So
right.
It's as if it's a one-on-one experience with them, in which I find the whole four walls around me and the roof over me is constrained when it comes to being more creative.
Yeah.
That's what I feel. So I can actually improvise on a lot of things. Particularly the stuff I do is all more hands-on. So by screen sharing, when I shoot something, and I can actually, they get to see what I'm doing with my own device. So it's a personal attention. It's like paying personal attention. That's what I feel about it.
I agree. I think we've learned a lot about what we can do in an online environment, and maybe things that we never thought we could teach this way, we realize we can. Because I teach web design and I teach some coding classes, and I always thought I needed to be in the room with the students to assist them. But I found, like you said, that helping them with the screen sharing and being able to have like one-on-one conversations on the screen have been very productive.
I get into coding in the second term, and we're into the first term. We're just completing the first semester here. So I do coding for data journalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for the visualization scraping, not the coding thing, the R and Python, That's perfect.
And I teach JavaScript in our coding class. It is toward doing visualizations and things like that. It's an elective. Not all students take it, obviously, but it's a challenging class. But and I also teach a mobile app design class, and that had to switch last spring. And that was pretty challenging because it was iPhone app, and so everybody had to have a Mac. And not everybody had a Mac, so we had to find ways to get them the equipment so they could finish the course. That was the semester that we switched halfway. I don't think I'll be able to teach that class that way again until we're back in person and we can be in a lab. But we'll see.
How is Texas looking like, Cindy? Any chance of turning red?
It's already red.
Rather blue rather.
I mean, I don't even want to jinx it. We have had amazing turnout after one day of early voting in the large cities. I think Houston went, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they said their record for the first day of early voting was something like 60,000, and they had like 138,000 yesterday. So almost double, I guess more than double. So if that trend continues and the big cities really turn out, I mean, it's possible because it's a very tight race in terms of polls, and that's very unusual for Texas. Austin is more of a liberal spot within Texas. You may be aware of that. So sometimes we're a little bit insulated from what's going on in the rest of the state. But like many big cities in the U.S., most of them are Democratic.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all are following this election very closely.
Yes. Because it's matters to us, because who you elect matters more to the rest of the world than America. Just imagine if George Bush hadn't been re-elected, it would have changed the world.
Yes.
Is Beto O'Rourke, is he campaigning for the Democrats already? Has he withdrawn?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What?
Beto O'Rourke.
Beto O'Rourke. He's great. I mean, what about him?
No, is he campaigning? Is he active for?
Yeah, he's been out campaigning. I think everybody's campaigning. I haven't seen him around here, but I think there are other pockets in Texas that he's probably, like in West Texas where he lives, that he's trying to make more of a difference. Yeah.
Ganesh, can we get started?
Yes, sir. We can, sir. We should, sir.
Yeah.
Start recording.
Yeah. Okay. Very warm welcome, Cindy. And remember, I tried to reach out to you 5 years ago. So thanks to Corona, now we are all stuck home. To borrow your words, maybe perhaps we got lucky with you 4 or 5 years ago. I tried to let you were super busy, and you responded saying you're in the middle of too many conferences, and you just didn't have time. And another problem was with because after if it's an in-person classes, they would have been too tired by now, and it's very difficult to drag them out from the hostels, from their dorms. So this was thanks to Corona, thanks to everything, and very warm welcome to Chennai. And I don't think you need any introduction because I've already distributed shared what you shared with us. But just in case, she teaches at Texas State University, and her expertise is in coding and product management, and her PhD is in journalism. And you studied at Texas, right? You did your PhD in Texas. Okay, great. Okay, you're teaching now. Alumni of Texas and professor at Texas, which is a great thing.
Two different schools. I'll explain. They're two. Like Texas State is not the same as University of Texas.
Okay, right. Yeah. So yeah, that's Cindy Royal for you, Dr. Cindy Royal for you, and I have a request to you. Just after her talk, when you ask questions, please try to stick to one question. Then just don't make any statements, please. Let's try to make you utilize her time and as much as we can. Okay, thank you. Okay, very warm welcome, Cindy, and the floor is yours. And please mute the mics, please, others.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you all today. I understand that I am in good company with some friends. Jeff Jarvis and Carrie Brown have spoken to you, so I feel like I'm, they may be tough acts to follow. I can give a little bit more detail about my background. I have a business background. I was a business undergrad and I have an MBA, and I worked in the tech industry for most of my career. And sometime in the mid-90s, I started playing with web design. Somebody at work showed me some HTML, and that really changed everything. I started doing that as a hobby, and then really realizing that the internet might be something important to the way that we communicate. And that turned out to be true. So in 1999, I entered the University of Texas, which is in Austin, and got my PhD in journalism and mass communication. I was able to study across the university. I was able to study things in addition to mass communication in business and computer science. And I finished my PhD. I worked for 1 year in Richmond, Virginia, at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is a very good school, but I missed Austin. And so an opportunity came up at Texas State University, which is just south of Austin. And I live in Austin now. So I was able to come back to Austin and have a very happy life and continue the life that I had here. So I've been at Texas State for, this is my 15th year. This particular semester, I am on sabbatical doing research. I teach what is now called our Digital Media Innovation Program. It's an undergraduate degree, and I'll talk more about that in my presentation. And I'm the director of our Media Innovation Lab, of which we do various events and we apply for grants and do research and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And the courses that I teach, I started talking about a few minutes ago, but I teach things like web design. I teach coding classes as they relate to data presentation, JavaScript. I teach a mobile app design class. I teach the capstone in our digital media innovation program, which is a product strategy class, which we're going to be talking a lot about. And I teach, a combination of theoretical and practical courses. So I hope that I can learn a little bit more about your program as we go, and I'll talk for a while. If anybody really does want to ask a question as we're going, I'm happy to make this an interactive session. But we'll definitely have some time at the end. I'm going to share my screen if I'm allowed to. Let's get that up here and go to, all right, can you all see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, we can see it.
All right, I'm going to hide you for now. Make it smaller. I can see some of you. All right, so that is me. So the world is changing in terms of how we communicate. Things that we take for granted are very, very different. What used to be video, that was something that we would watch on a television screen or in a movie theater, is now perpetuating across the web in various ways. We see video on social media. People upload their own videos. We use videos in a variety of multimedia packages and presentations. Quite often, they are broken down into pieces instead of one long video. TikTok is all the rage these days, and so video is a really different thing. It used to be something that professionals did, and now it's all around us, and that is primarily because of the access that we have to the technology via smartphones. So I want to talk with you all about your usage of smartphones. I think our idea of coding has changed, and programming. Programming used to be what we would program on a channel's offering. And coding as a academic was what we did in maybe a content analysis. But now coding is programming with a computer, and we do that in a variety of ways. It may be something simple where you're working in a content management system like WordPress, and you have to tweak the HTML in your WordPress post because something doesn't look right. It could be something where you're creating JavaScript to make it interactive. And so these are some additional skills that are valuable in a journalism environment, especially as you start seeing how other programs, other news organizations are incorporating different types of techniques in what they're providing. Interactive techniques, personalized techniques, things that allow the user to really engage with the material, with the content. So also our idea of a journalist is changing. A journalist used to be somebody, hunched over a typewriter, typing a story, or standing in front of a professional camera doing a stand-up. But now a journalist can be a lot of different things. It can be somebody that's interviewing somebody with their smartphone, right at an event and posting it to social media. It could be somebody that's working on strategy to create a new product that meets users' needs. And it could be somebody sitting at a computer doing computer coding. So we have to change our impression of a lot of these topics that were really decided in media. And now the world is changing. It's significantly changing. It's quite different. I did some research, and I think I had you read some of the projects that I've done in the past few years. And I wrote the piece at the end of 2015 called Product Management is the New Journalism. And from that research that I was just starting then, I did the project called Managing Digital Products in a Newsroom Context. And I think one of the key quotes from that was when one of my respondents said, "We used to know what a media product was. It was a newspaper or a television broadcast. Now it's much broader." It is much broader. It's much more complicated. And if you look around this page, you'll see websites, you'll see apps, you'll see somebody working on a TikTok for the Washington Post. There are bots. There are special project and event sites and apps, podcasts, newsletters, and even stories themselves can be products. When you look at the work that something like ProPublica does or Texas Tribune, when there's a lot of data behind it and it requires a lot of skills to be able to create the product that the user can interact with. So I think that we're in an environment now where product management is the new journalism. Somebody is managing these products. Yes, journalism sits on them, but the important role is in how they are managed. It could be an editor that's doing that function, but it's a very different function than what editors have done in the past in terms of bringing together a variety of different skill sets, maybe on different teams, and taking a product to its completion, and in many cases, following it throughout its life. Now, outside of journalism, these product skills are also very important, and these are some places where some of my students work. Some of you may not work in journalism, and that is at least the case in the United States. A lot of people get journalism degrees. They're very valuable degrees, very important skills to have, and then they go somewhere else to work, mainly because of the job market. Maybe they can make more money in another place. But there are opportunities for even these broader product skills to be used in other places. So for example, one of my former students works for the grocery company H-E-B. It's a very big grocery company in Texas, and he's a product manager on their mobile app. So think about this. It's a grocery company, and I've often asked him, how's it going? He goes, well, I work for a grocery store. Their culture is groceries, but he works on the digital side for them. And a very important feature, particularly during the pandemic, is to be able to order your groceries through a mobile app. I have a student who works for the city of San Antonio as a webmaster, so she works on that website. I have students who work for various tech companies around Austin. One of them is Chorus, that does a social media platform. And then I have a couple of students who work for Texas Restaurant Association. One is the chief innovation officer, and another works for her as a digital marketing strategist. So these product roles are very important in a variety of applications, both within media and outside of media. So let's see, I'm gonna pull up the strip here and see if anybody has any. Does anybody have any questions at this point that I can answer? Am I going too fast, too slow? All good? Okay, I'm just gonna.
Good.
Okay, I'm just gonna continue then. So some of this is stuff that you probably saw when we were, when you read the articles that I provided. For Product management is the digital technologies that provide new ways for media companies to distribute information, to engage the public, and assess results and outcomes. It lets you operate at the intersection of technology and user and business. So you'll see this little chart over here that has the intersection of those three areas. It's very important. It's a really cross-functional area, and you have to be able to understand all of these things. And it starts with the user, where you really understand the user needs before you develop a product. And the product should also reflect the organization's commitment to ethics and its responsibility to the audience. So it's a very important function. I'm trying to figure out why this is here. All right, we won't worry about that for now. So some product concepts, and you may have read about some of these topics as you are in your program. You want to, as I said, develop products that address users' needs. If they're not addressing users' needs, then there's no need to make them because people aren't going to use them. It's a really different way of thinking about what a media company does. So they, would do user research, and that might include talking to people, doing surveys, having focus groups. And we often hear these with different names. So you might hear the thing human-centered design, and it has some different phases. First, inspiration, where this is where you're finding out what people need, and then ideation, where you brainstorm and come up with a lot of different ideas. You might have seen lots of pictures of Post-its. Maybe you all have done your own brainstorming, where people go through different exercises to try to come up with the different kinds of topics that potential solutions for a problem that somebody has, and what they would be able to do to implement that problem. And you might have actually heard this referred to as design thinking. So, there are the different phases here in design thinking of empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, testing, and then sharing, and then starting over again from the beginning, where you're constantly iterating through a process to continually add the user perspective to the products that you're creating. So some more product concepts I think are important, and I've got a Post-it here to kind of demonstrate very often people will use Post-its to help them with ideas, to be able to help them lead group exercises, and to be able to focus on a problem. You may have heard of the concept of Agile Development, and so that's also what I'm going for here when I talk about design thinking. Instead of doing a long, drawn-out process where it maybe takes several years to be able to complete, and then you have no feedback and no way to adjust it, maybe you've spent millions of dollars and it was not a success. Agile development means you have short iterations. You break the project into smaller pieces so that you can assess it and adjust it as you go. And you may have also heard of the phrase user experience, or UX. And this also is another way of understanding how to put the user at the front and develop experiences for users that support engagement. So there's a lot of overlap in these concepts that I'm talking about. User experience often has a lot to do with how you create the interface, but it's not just that. It really is how you create the entire experience for the user, for how they hear about you, to how they communicate with you, to how they stay in touch with you in terms of that particular product. And this can be anything from an event where they're at a conference and they meet you and talk with you, and then suddenly they become a customer. It could also be a particular digital product that they would first hear about in some manner, maybe through social media. They would enter the product. They would be encouraged to join the product in some way, maybe at some point encouraged to pay for the product, and then engage on that product. And prototyping is something that is another skill that goes along with product concepts, in that you would use various prototyping tools, sometimes something as simple as a pen and paper, or pencil rather, something easy to make changes and modifications, where you would draw out what you thought the product would do, what it should look like, what the different phases of it should be. The reason why you do that is so that you can create a product very quickly and get it in the hands of users to get some feedback from them. And even a low fidelity prototype, something that's on a piece of paper, can get people saying, oh, well, what would that button be for? Or, well, I don't really like the placement of that. And then allow you to make changes before you've put a lot of time into the development. I always tell my students in my web design class to start with a piece of paper, because if you just open up the software program or if you start coding, you have no idea what you're going to make, and you're going to do a lot of iterations before you actually create something. And you may even go down a path a little bit further than you wanted, but because you'd spent all that time, you kind of feel attached to it. If you do a prototype, you can throw it away. It's easy. It's something that you did quickly. And then when you actually sit down to code or to work on something in a software program, then you're much better. I'm getting a little echo here. I'm not sure who that is. You're much more prepared for what you're going to be able to create. Is there a question, or was it just somebody that had their mic open? Okay, so analytics are also very important. So being able to look at any type of analytics, depending on what you decide are the important things to measure for your product, and then doing an evaluation so that can go into future iterations of the product. So I've been talking to a lot of people who are in product, and I ask them often, what are the skills and competencies that people need to be product managers or to work in a product environment? And by and large, the majority of them say communication is the most important skill. Even people who are very technical always tell me communication is the most important skill. And you can see why that's important, because they have to work in this intersection of so many different areas. In some ways, they have to speak different languages that appeal to the people that work in those different areas of user, tech, and business. Along with communication goes empathy, being able to kind of understand everybody's problems, whether it's the user or whether it's other people that you're working with. I often have to push them on the tech competencies that are necessary, because I think people who work in tech take for granted all the tech that they know. And so they're usually downplaying that. They're usually like, oh, communication is important, and empathy and problem solving, being able to be strategic and lead cross-functional teams. And then I'm like, well, what about tech? Oh, that's not that important. And then they kind of go, oh, well, if somebody knows a little HTML, that's good. It's not required, but that's good. Actually, that's really good. And then, oh yeah, if they know a little CSS, that's probably good too. And oh, if they know a little JavaScript, like it wouldn't hurt. Like they don't have to, but it wouldn't hurt. So in these conversations that I have with people, it really paints a picture of a very broad set of skills that are not necessarily deep. You have to be exposed to a lot of different things. Many of them talk about being able to solve problems on their own. The person would be able to solve problems on their own because quite often these things have not been done before, and there's not a way to go to be able to find the answers to these problems. And I have a former student who in presentations, he jokes and he says that on his resume, he has professional Googler. So I think that, that's an interesting way for you to think about yourselves, is that you might be some sort of a professional Googler in a situation where you're finding the answer to a problem. I know that's how I work as a professor. I'm always having to learn something new. You can't be the expert on every single one of these complex things that we're working on. I was doing something in Qualtrics recently, and I was like, I know you can do this in here. And of course I had to Google that to figure out how to make that work in Qualtrics. But then it's also very important that you would connect the product to the organization's mission. And one of the things that's been very important in my research is to understand how journalistic sensibilities and ethics get built into the products. An example that I often use is Facebook. Facebook has a lot of smart people working there, and I am pretty sure that they had some idea that some of the engagement on their platform could be influencing very important decisions like the outcomes of elections based on misinformation possibly spreading on their platform. However, they did not think about that in the early stages of their product. That was an afterthought of the product, like, whoops, sorry. We didn't really think about that in advance. They were just busy spreading the word about their platform. And it's not just Facebook. I mean, obviously misinformation spreads in a lot of places. So I often talk to product developers, product managers at news organizations about getting the ethics, the journalistic sensibilities into the products in the beginning and have them be present in the products as they develop them. To some extent, people have trouble answering that question. They will say things like, we get journalists involved. I think because many of them come from a journalism background, it's just part of who they are. And so they feel like it's being considered as they make products. But as we get more and more people with different types of backgrounds working on products and media organizations, we end up with people that have different culture and values coming into the media organization. So I already mentioned these two articles, and hopefully you all were able to read those. Again, I wrote The Product Management is the New Journalism at the end of 2015, predicting 2016. I published The Managing Digital Products in a Newsroom Context in 2017, and I'm working on an updated version of that going forward. This year, I work with the group of scholars, and so hopefully you all had a chance to read this article. Journalism and Mass Communication started this new format for articles called an invited forum. And I heard about it last year at the AEJMC conference, the Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communication conference in Toronto. One of my friends told me about this new format, and I was like, well, I want to do one on product management. So as soon as I got home, I got in touch with the editor, explained a few times what I meant by product management, because not everybody understands it. I gathered this group of different scholars and professionals to write the different sections. And so the way that the invited forum works is that one person will write their piece, and then the next person will respond to and add to the piece. And so you'll see the different areas that we did in that. And one of the concepts in that piece, and this is a big concept that I'm using in other research as I go, is this idea of journalism in product and journalism as product. When I speak to people about product in media, sometimes they have a negative reaction, and maybe some of you do as well. Maybe when we have the discussion that will come out. And so I always initially say, well, look, the journalism has to sit on some sort of a product. It is delivered in a product, whether that's a newspaper or a website or a mobile app or a podcast or a newsletter. It has to exist in some sort of a product, and those products have to be managed. So that's the journalism in product approach. And I think a lot of people start understanding what my goals are when I describe it that way. It's when you start describing journalism as product, like the journalism itself as a product, that it's more of like, it's a different way of thinking about what journalism is. It is that product management is the new journalism that I said in that first piece. It's really changing the mission and goals of a media organization to say that you're thinking about the journalism as a product. And that just boils down to, are we thinking about the user and everything that we create? And so that really changes not only the mission and the goals of a media organization, but all the functions within it. The functions of journalists, reporters, and editors now have other people that are in the environment and that they have to work together and that they have to have crossover skills in this product world. And this is a graph from my recent work that will hopefully be published in Digital Journalism in the next few weeks. I'm working with Avery Holton and Valerie Belair-Gagnon. And this is something that I talked about in various presentations, but I hadn't really had a chance to put it into any research. But it is a model for looking at products and what are the elements of a product. What the audience does in terms of the inputs into the product, and then the engagement that is a result of it. Because when you're talking about digital products, the thing that lets the engagement happen within that product is, one, that there's a platform, that there's a place for you to do it that has form elements for you to fill out, that there's some user experience. Then there's the data, because if you're on Facebook and you make a post, that has to go into a database somewhere. And it has to be tagged in a certain way so that it will show up on the platform in the ways that it needs to. And then there are algorithms that, that's a very popular word these days, understanding about the algorithms that control what we see and what we're able to do on the platform. And so all those things lead to engagement. And then the engagement thus influences the audience. And again, it's an agile process of understanding the audience needs that result in engagement each time through the process. So are there any questions at this point? Put this up here.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question, ma'am.
Yes,
Can I
please.
ask? Ma'am, how has product journalism benefited the disabled and specially challenged people?
For disabled people, is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am. Specially challenged people.
I guess I didn't understand that last part. Sorry.
Ma'am, I asked, how has product journalism benefited the disabled and the specially challenged people?
I would say that, that's a good question. It's not something that I often get asked, but I would say that being able to create products that meet the needs of every audience could take into consideration people with special needs. And maybe even making special products for them, or actually being concerned about the accessibility of the products they make. And I believe somewhere on this chart here, the word accessibility exists. And so I would say that, one, that would be important for the audience. Two, I think in terms of careers for people who want to move into product, it's a very different career than a journalist, and it may provide different avenues for people with different disabilities, but that's going to depend on the disability. But I think, like every form of diversity, having diverse people on product teams only makes the products better that they're going to be creating. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, one final question. Will product journalism replace print journalism in the future?
I'm sorry, will it what?
Will product journalism replace print journalism in the future?
I think so. That's why I said product management is the new journalism. I think that you're seeing the change in the large organizations like New York Times and Washington Post and places like ProPublica and Texas Tribune. I think they have already changed their processes. That doesn't mean journalism won't exist. As I said, the journalism has to sit on these products. It's still very important that people will be reporting, but the ways in which they're reporting will probably be different depending on the products that are being created. If the goal of the organization, if it's identified that users want a podcast, then they're going to need to have people who can work on a podcast. A newsletter is a very different kind of a textual product than a newspaper or than even a website. And so the journalism is going to sit in all these different formats. And that, I think, is what every media organization is going to need to do to be able to understand, execute these different products and be able to understand, what the relevant content is to be on there. So if you're going into journalism, I think understanding that now as you're thinking about going into it is going to be key to your future. I have a student, former student, who works now for Gannett, and he works on their innovation team as a front-end developer. And he did his interview, and when he came back to me, he goes, I probably used the word product 50 times in that interview. So just be ready for that to be kind of the buzzword in the coming days, because people are very interested in young people's ideas about the products that they want to use and what they want to see. He got that job, obviously, and he's doing a really good job with them. Does that answer the question?
Yes, ma'am. One follow-up question. Does that mean that the product journalism will replace the manpower of the journalists?
Will replace the what? The manpower?
I mean, will product journalism replace the manpower of the journalist?
I think it will broaden the ways that we think it'll broaden the ways that we think journalism is done. And so there will still be people reporting and editing, but it will be in a different context. And the people who are doing the reporting and editing will, as I said, will need to understand that context. I apologize if I'm not completely understanding because everybody's in small boxes. I'm having a hard time watching your mouth and also hearing what you're saying because it's a little bit fuzzy. Other questions at this
Yes,
point?
ma'am. I had one question.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand that in a competitive market where products compete with each other, there's this whole idea of missing a news story. So I'm curious to understand how, if some products have a similar user base, product management in journalism can diversify the news itself.
So when you're saying that there's products that are competitive in the environment, what do you mean? By different companies?
Yeah, by different companies, like let's say there are like 3-4 news companies who have a similar user base. So there's this whole idea that they'll all have to chase the same story that comes in. So I'm trying to understand how that can be diversified with product management, because since you have the same user base, do you keep giving them the same news or do you try to diversify that?
I would ask you that. Do you? I mean, these are questions that the media organizations will have to answer. Are these pieces of content, are these approaches relevant for the user base that we have defined for our specific products? What we have now are the same news organizations going after the same stories and posting them on their sites, and we're seeing the same thing across 5 or 10. In the United States, most local markets are lucky to have one newspaper. They may have several, like Austin has several local news stations. They're all talking about the same stories. They don't have to. That is not a given. And so understanding the audiences better may allow for more diverse content, and it may allow for a startup organization to identify a group that's their needs are not being met and be able to create a product specifically for them. And I think that's very critical in this environment in which we assume that we knew the audience. We assume, but it was the mass audience, and there are niche audiences that can be better served, but they have to be understood first. And I guess one of the examples is, maybe you've heard of this brand new organization called the 19th. And it is a new nonprofit news organization that covers stories about women in politics, stories and issues that are related to women. The people who started it came out of the Texas Tribune, which was the Politics of Texas, a website that was created for that. They've been around a little bit more than 10 years. The 19th just started this year in the midst of the pandemic. They are taking the female angle in every way possible in every type of a story that they're presenting. They're also trying to do it in as a diverse way as possible that other organizations might not have been done. And that is due to the fact that they're mindful of that in their hiring and in their leadership, that they're, getting diverse people involved in that. So they could be covering the exact same thing like Joe Biden's campaign, but they're really focusing on some of the women's issues associated with the campaign. They're very much focusing on Kamala Harris as the first woman of color to be a vice presidential candidate and hopefully the vice president. And it's just been a very interesting time. And they planned this before Kamala Harris was presented as a vice presidential candidate. So they've just had good timing in terms of really key women's issues that they can cover. So they've made decisions. We're not going to cover certain stories, and we're not going to cover them in the same way as everybody else is. We're going to cover them with this unique perspective. And so I think all organizations need to make those decisions. And I have a feeling that many of you will be involved with those decisions in the organizations that you work on going forward. Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Great. Those are good questions. You guys are asking good questions, making me wake up this morning. One of the things I recognized several years ago when I was working with a group of faculty from other schools first for the AEJMC, it was on their strategic planning committee. And then back with my own faculty when we were doing our own strategic planning, was I was using words that they kind of knew, but they weren't as familiar with using these words as I am. Like, these are just things that are part of my life because I worked in the tech industry, because I attend tech events. And so it's easy for me to talk about responsive design and interfaces and search engine optimization and content management systems. I mean, you name it, right? And so I really found that we didn't have a shared language for being able to do the basic strategic planning, because again, this is a very large shift to the media profession and also to the academics who teach in a media profession. And so I said, well, I'm going to come up with a list of terms that would be helpful for people to know. And I came up with this chart. I thought we might be talking about 10 or 15. We're really looking at 60 to 100 terms that are not necessarily native to people who are traditional media academics or practitioners. I mean, things like platforms and products. I mean, these are just not things that are part of the day-to-day conversation, but growing more and more so all the time. So you may look at some of the things in this presentation and be like, okay, I get engagement, we're talking about entrepreneurship, but then there may be some other ones in here that are not as familiar to you. And there's probably some that are missing on here because I did this, several months ago. And so new things come in, they get into whatever category they need to go in, and then they become adopted in the vernacular. And so the most basic foundation is having the shared language to be able to even start to think about creating organizations that are focused on delivering digital products. Many of the things we've talked about in this presentation show up, agile methodologies, prototyping, and things like that. I assume that for many of you, those might have been foreign concepts. They are words you've probably heard, but you're not comfortable using them on a regular basis. And I think this is more and more the language or the vernacular that we're going to be seeing in media organizations. They become more like tech companies, but it is a very special kind of a tech company with special missions. And often times will compete with other technology companies in different ways. So this is a LinkedIn list of jobs, emerging jobs. This year, 2020, product owner was one of the top ones. So I just wanted to point that out. I think they call it product owner because these things can be called different things in different capacities, whether it's a product editor or product manager, product director. We even see senior product or chief product officers. You're seeing, and maybe you're seeing them in your country. I am hearing that globally, the word product is not used as prominently as it is in the United States. We see a lot of product related jobs in the US. Globally, these jobs are being done, but they may not be calling them product jobs, but the function is still there. And then you'll see a lot of other very focused technology positions that I think to some extent will continue to be important in media that are on this list here. So I've got a bunch of different jobs to talk to you about here. And let me close this down a little bit so we can see most of this stuff. So there are jobs in the engagement area. This is a job at the Texas Tribune for an engagement producer, and I'll make sure that you all have access to this presentation if you want to be able to look into more detail. I hear from professionals that engagement or audience jobs are the best ways to get into a media organization if you want a future product role. In most companies right now, a product manager job is not the entry level. However, I have heard some discussions at conferences that they're talking about creating junior product manager positions to be able to create that kind of a career path. But without that, getting a job in either engagement, audience, or social media is a good step in, because it's really getting the person who has that job interested in what's going on with users and creating engagement around users. So you can see some of the responsibilities here. Again, Texas Tribune is a digital first nonprofit media organization in Austin, Texas. But they want somebody who can curate their newsletter and facilitate their Facebook community and build reader participation and coordinate engagement. And so they've got all these different skills that are necessary for somebody to work in this environment. This is another position, a developer on their data visuals team for the Texas Tribune. And so I also want to see students moving into these roles where they might be very technologically oriented, but they are able to work in a media environment to create data visualizations, to be able to provide ways for people to interact with the data and make it more meaningful for them. And so you can see in this presentation or in this job description, some of the things that are required. But if you go down to like the about you, you are curious about what makes Texas tick and what data can tell us about the second largest state in the country. You know, so it's not just all technology skills that they're looking for. They're looking for people with a passion for this kind of work. ProPublica, also very similar to Texas Tribune. They do very good investigative work, and you may have seen some of their projects that are online. And they want people to, when they hire news application developers, people who can design and develop interactive graphics and be able to wrangle data and interrogate databases. And so what they're looking for, and I love to show these things to students, you know, things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, exactly what we are teaching students in our program. Experience with data journalism, whether it's scraping, cleaning, or analyzing data. Scraping, that's one of those words that like, oh, what does that mean? You know, how do you get the data that you want to use, particularly if it's somewhere online and not an easy format to work with it. They list some different languages. They would prefer that people have journalism experience. And so finding that intersection of journalism experience and technology experience is very challenging. And I think it provides an opportunity for those of you who want to move into journalism. There are a lot of product jobs at New York Times, and I just pulled this one out because it has to do with that New York Times cooking app. And so they are looking for a senior product manager of growth. Again, this is a senior product manager job, but I have seen people move into senior roles very, very quickly, and you all will be there before you know it. And so, you know, what this does is, you know, talk about the different strategic initiatives and experiments that somebody needs to do to work on the New York Times cooking app and to run that. I think that's a good example of the kind of extra product a media organization can do. It's in their wheelhouse. New York Times is a very culturally oriented product. The paper, the website has always been very culturally driven, and a lot of that has to do with cooking in restaurants. And they just decided to spin off a side project because they felt like there were users who would be interested in that, who might actually want to pay money for it. And it has been quite successful. And so they needed somebody who could actually develop, design, analyze, market this entire new product. And Vox Media, I hope some of you are familiar with Vox Media. And they are a digital only online offering of a media organization. They have a product that is their own content management system, the place where the people that work there go to input their articles so that they show up on their website. Their content management system, they created in-house, and it's called Chorus. And so they have been known for doing this kind of thing where they're creating products that they might be able to sell to other media companies. So they have a senior product manager for Chorus. And in this particular job, you can see the different things. You'll serve as product lead on a cross-functional team, work closely with designers, engineers, analysts, community managers, etc. What you'll bring is a fluency with the practice of product management, including research, design, planning, development, and continuous iteration, exceptional communication skills, and then familiarity with the evolving ways that audiences find, watch, and share quality journalism. you'll notice that there's very little, I mean, I think it's implied, but there's very little in this description that says you have to be good at tech. None of this in here says you have to be a programmer. So they're really focused on somebody with strategy, vision, and good communication skills. I would not discount, though, the need for somebody that has a strong understanding of technology culture and an appreciation for it, almost living it. Many of you may be that way sort of naturally by, in your day-to-day with working with technology. Maybe you're paying attention to trends in technology. So I would not discount that. I would not take that for granted, even though it's not in some of these descriptions. And then this is an associate product manager for Axios, and that is just another online news organization. The ideal candidate should have an entrepreneurial spirit, a passion for building technology products. And they mention agile software development in here. They mention UX design and development skills. And there's that big one, excellent written and verbal communication skills, and also an understanding of HTML, CSS, how websites work. So I hope this is starting to put some ideas in your head about the kinds of jobs you may be qualified for and the kinds of things that would make you qualified for them. This really tight package of people who are great communicators, who understand journalism, but really have a good sense of what's going on in the technology environment. So I've got a few more of these. Here's a product manager for the Washington Post. This has a lot to do with mobile in this particular description. The mobile products team is a small group that's passionate about the intersection of news and technology, exactly what we've been talking about. A demonstrated fluency with the major mobile operating systems, iOS and Android is preferred. And then under the responsibilities, you can see all the activities about identifying new features, managing the prioritization of these features on a roadmap, overseeing all these relationships with the software development vendors and partners, a lot of translation of ideas, both verbal and written. And so again, just more examples of that. So before I start talking about our program, because I just will talk for a few minutes, does anybody have any questions right now?
Yes,
I had a
ma'am.
small question.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Ma'am, okay. Ma'am, I had a question about, since you talked about you teach full stack development and programs about Python and the tech part of it. I wanted to ask, I followed a bit of trends in the United States and UK about how journalists are, trained in Python. So what do you think is the future of technology in journalism? Will it be Python or R or Ruby on Rails? And which direction do you see it?
I don't get too caught up in any particular language because I think that's going to change. I think Ruby on Rails is a framework that uses the Ruby language, right? And that was a really popular thing 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you don't see that quite as much these days, that people have moved on to other types of platforms, other ways of development, right? But what you learn in that environment is still valuable. I think between Python and R, it depends on what you're working on, what you know. I think they both can kind of do the same things. But they're the languages of Python and R are very different than a language like Ruby, mainly in terms of what the expected outcome is. So like Python, there is Django, which is their framework that was built in Python, right? So that's similar to Ruby on Rails. But what I'm seeing most people do now is they use Python for statistical analysis and scraping and things like that. They don't necessarily use it as a backend for a content management system or a framework for a project. And R is just a different way of handling that. They both have these different types of libraries and notebooks and tools that go with them. So if you learn one, I think, and you can see that like in most of these job descriptions, they mention several of them because they know if you know one that you could probably adapt to another. So I think it's more important to understand why you need to use these things than picking any particular one. In our program, we teach a little bit of Python around scraping. I teach a lot of JavaScript because it's a great language to work with HTML and CSS on a web browser to do, to add logic and interactivity to a website. And then I have dabbled with teaching students R. I think R is kind of valuable for maybe PhD students who are doing large analyses and want to keep all their data iterations in a notebook. But that doesn't mean you can't do that with Python. So it just, you figure out what's the best tool to use for the job that you have, and understanding what each one does is the most important thing.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. I think there was another question, at least one.
Yes, ma'am. One last question. Ma'am, one last question, ma'am. What is the status of product journalism in third world countries and also in countries with low press freedom?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm working with the News Product Alliance, which I have a slide about at the end of the presentation. It is a brand new group that started because a group got together in Philadelphia in February before coronavirus really caused everybody to stop traveling. So it was one of the last trips I made. And it was SourceCon product. There's a big organization called SourceCon, and they did a convening specifically on product. And they've been working on this even before that, but out of that came this News Product Alliance. Because it came out of that group, it's primarily US based. I did a survey most recently with that group. I think more than 50% of the respondents were from the United States. The countries that responded were Brazil, Germany, and the UK. And so we don't really have a good picture of what product management is like in other places. I have heard anecdotal comments from people either on Twitter or emails that people have sent me that globally the word product is not being used as much, but those types of functions are being handled. They just might not be called product. I have taught with the UT, the University of Texas Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas. I've taught 2 different classes that were online courses, those MOOCs, those massively open online courses on product management. And we often had people from several countries, hundreds of countries in those MOOCs, because we'd have several thousand people in the classes. So I know that these concepts are being spread. My sense is that in places that are like local journalism in the US that don't have resources, they are struggling to stay afloat, to find sustainable models, and to be able to do this at the same time as that, to be able to find these new experiences and expertise is quite challenging. So I would want to know from you all if you have a sense of if media organizations are adapting to product concepts. But my prediction, I said it 5 years ago, product management is the new journalism. It may be slower in some places than other, but my prediction is that in order to be sustainable, this as an approach or a mindset is going to be critical. Does anybody have any input to that? I mean, I think you all are maybe the better arbiters of what is happening that I'm not even exposed to.
Well, I had a question. It's not related to what you're saying. So what's your take on the future of field reporting? So now that there is so much technological innovation and influence of technology and product on journalism, as you said, the lines between technology and journalism are starting to blur, and so what is your take on the idea of field reporting, having human interactions, going to places and having human interactions in order to gather news and make stories out of it? What's your viewpoint on that?
My answer to that is yes. All of that has to still happen. There has to be that human connection with reporting, and that will continue. I don't think that's going away. I think it expands our idea of what journalism is, because the interaction that somebody has in the field might be shot on a cell phone. It may be delivered in a TikTok. It may be delivered in a Snapchat story or an Instagram story. It may be delivered in all those things, and the reporters in the field gathering all these different assets to be able to put together for the website, for a podcast, for a mobile app for social media. So I think it expands the idea of what field reporting could be and expands the skill set of what somebody needs to be able to work in that environment. One of the things that comes up a lot in my interviews with product professionals is that working on a product in a media organization is very different than working on it in a technology company than if you're like Facebook or Google making products. And mainly it's because of the speed of news, right? Like news happens quickly, breaking news is important to be able to be covered. And there's not often the luxury of this time to be able to, oh, let's look at what the user needs and let's do this prototyping. And so the product has to happen, the product development has to happen in conjunction with the journalism that's happening in its normal time. So these are very special technology companies. They're not going to be able to be run exactly like Google or Apple or Facebook. They have to think about the ways that they can incorporate product concepts with the speed of news. I think one of the things that may change field reporting a little bit, however, is the idea that you would do a wrap up or follow up on what the impact of a series of articles or reportage was, instead of just moving on to the next thing. So you can build in lessons learned to the next project or to the next thing that's going on. So I think it will have a dramatic impact on field reporting, but I think there will still be people in the field talking to people. I also think that the coronavirus has shown us we don't always have to be in the place with the person to be able to have good conversations like we're having now. So I think that everybody is becoming very creative in terms of how they are handling this situation. I hope that answered your question. So I've got a few more slides here, make this smaller, that talk about our program and maybe get some of your impressions of that. The degree that I mentioned that we started 4 years ago called Digital Media Innovation, it now has more than 300 students currently enrolled in it. So we went from 0 to 300 in a short period of time. We've had probably pretty close to 200 students graduate with it. So it's an undergrad degree. We have a STEM designation for science, technology, engineering, and math. So it's an interesting combination of a degree in a school of journalism that's STEM-based. And it prepares students for product-based positions, all the things we've been talking about. Again, digital skills presented in a communication context, I think is possible. So we're not leaving out any of the important things like, writing, important communication skills. We're just presenting the digital skills in this context. Excuse me, get a little tickle. So we focus on things like web development, data analytics, social strategy, and innovation. Those are all sort of required elements of the curriculum. We have some pretty innovative faculty that make this happen, people who are not afraid to experiment, very much like your professor. And then this also supports a digital media concentration. So somebody could be a journalism major or a PR major, and they would get a digital media concentration. So I want to show you some of the actual jobs that some of our alumni have gotten. So the recent grad list really shows the different kinds of jobs that people who have had this exposure in our program. The first several in each of these are media companies. And then you can see that some also work for tech companies or other types of companies. So I mentioned the student who's the front-end developer at Gannett. We had the very first engineering fellow at Texas Tribune was a young woman. We were very excited that she got that almost like an internship fellowship. People who work at a new startup called Austonia, people who work for Business Insider, and then we have people who work, like I said, for a variety of technology companies. You've probably heard of GoDaddy, and then some of the more local companies like Chorus is a local Austin company that is a social media platform. And then some of the more experienced graduates, we've had other people who work at Texas Tribune. We have a student who works for the New York Times as a digital news editor, people at BuzzFeed. I mentioned the student who works for the grocery company as a product manager for their digital. We have UX designers who work for the insurance company USAA. And I mentioned the people who work at the Texas Restaurant Association, either the one who is more experienced as a chief innovation officer, but also a digital marketing person. So you can see quite a wide range of potential careers that somebody can have if they have this intersection of communication and tech. And, you know, I think some business savvy too. And then just a note, one of the programs that we have through the Media Innovation Lab is called the PH Digital Bootcamp, and the Knight Foundation gave me funding so that I could train other faculty, because we really want these ideas to spread to other programs, that they would be able to create their own innovation degrees for undergrads. I know a lot of programs have graduate programs this way. I know you talk to the people at CUNY, and they're mostly a graduate school. And you can do innovation when you have a small program pretty easily with a, you know, a smaller set of faculty. I know that CUNY focuses a lot on the people in the New York market as adjuncts that help them teach their classes, but we really need everyone teaching in an academic environment, including those with PhDs who do research, to understand the digital world. Not only does it allow them to influence curriculum, but it should also influence their scholarship, like the scholarship that I'm doing now around product. So we're really happy to have that. Knight Foundation gave us money for 3 years. We had our 3rd year this year. However, we were not able to bring them to San Marcos because of the COVID outbreak. And so we did the whole thing online. And I'm actually thinking about ways that we can continue this into the future as a completely online program. And then I mentioned the News Product Alliance. I already described that. There are more than 1,000 people who have signed up for this since they started it. I think it's been out for 3 weeks. And so in 3 weeks, 1,000 people signed up for the site. More than 300 people took my survey associated with it. So there are a lot of people that are very, very interested in product. When I did the research 4 years ago on product, there were maybe a dozen, 12 to 15 people that I talked to that were maybe not even called product managers, but they were working on digital products. Now to see that there are hundreds, if not thousands of people all across the world very interested in product management, and to see all these product positions grow online as opportunities has been very gratifying, and it's a very exciting time to see the news organization sort of grasping these new competencies. So that's the News Product Alliance, and that's it. So, you guys have had some really good questions. I want you to be able to ask other questions, but I want you to also tell me, now that you've heard all of this and you've read the things that I have prepared, and I'll turn off the screen share in a second. What I want to know is, where do you see yourself fitting into a news product culture? I'm going to turn off the share. You can see people. All right, so what do you think? What do you think now that you've seen this whole presentation?
Yeah, guys, it's your turn. Okay, it's your thing. Just go ahead.
Or what do you think?
It's great, because, I think it's great. And we are trying to implement a lot of things, but not as much as you guys are doing there in Texas. But quite a lot of things, because to include in our modules, that is data we have, and we actually have a lot of this. The whole program is based on, it's very tech driven, and it's very tech driven. It's not that technology is going to replace journalism, but I do strongly believe that journalists with technology are going to replace journalists without.
Yeah, I started thinking about this new degree because I was a Knight Fellow at Stanford, and this was in 2013, 2014. So I came out of Stanford with this idea that we should have a brand new degree. I was very influenced by the startup mindset at Stanford that I thought, well, maybe we should do a startup degree. I heard somebody use that phrase, a startup degree in our program. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. I want to start up in our program. That allowed us to create this new degree without having to upset too many people in the existing degrees. So we still have a journalism degree. We still have a PR degree and an advertising degree. We even have an electronic media degree, which is a broadcast journalism degree. So we still have all those degrees. As I said, people can take a digital concentration on top of those degrees. once we started with the digital media innovation degree, we said, you know, we're going to focus on all the other jobs, the jobs that you all are not preparing people for, these product-based jobs, right? Social media, audience, technology, programming, data visualization, data journalism. So when we did that, we started creating new classes. We hired a couple people. We didn't hire many people. We hired a couple people. Just having those resources in our department really helped influence some of the other programs where suddenly the PR department wanted a social media class, and they had to find some people who could teach that. The journalism program implemented a data journalism class and a multimedia journalism class as required. So it subtly imposed changes even on those other degrees at the same time as we were creating a new degree. And so we have this whole ecosystem. We have people who can teach and implement things within the traditional degrees. And then we have a degree that's very, what I call digitally immersive, so that somebody wants to really be one of those developers, data journalists, product managers, they would go our way. But if they have more of a traditional journalism career in mind, they can get it, but then they are still influenced by these other things that are in it. Other programs who have tried to, like, let's make a brand new degree for our journalism degree may not be as successful because it's just hard to influence change. It's very hard to influence change. So this was successful for us at the time in which it was successful for us. I don't know if I were to try to launch something today that it would get the same response. You know, it was the right time with the right group of people. It took us 2 years to get it through the university's levels of approval. The state of Texas as well, 2 years just to get it approved. So we started the approval process in 2014. We got it approved in 2016, and we've had it for 4 years since then. So curriculum innovation is not for the faint of heart. You have to be very persistent, and you have to be really committed to what you're proposing, but it can be done. And that's part of the goal of the PH Digital Bootcamp, is to get more people with that mindset on faculty, sitting in those personnel committee meetings and the curriculum committee meetings. Even if they're not able to influence change, they can at least be like the one who's always like, hey, we're not digital enough, or, you know, maybe we need a class like this, and then slowly influence change over time. So are there other questions? I still want to know how you all feel like you might fit into a product career in the future.
Ma'am, I had a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, ma'am, I feel like product would be the go-to media. Like it will become like a different kind of media, right? So whenever we talk about a product, the consumer part is also very important, right? So to enlarge the reach of the product, you need to make sure that you're connecting with the right kind of audience, the right kind of consumer, right? So what kind of steps as product managers can we take to analyze the consumer behavior without interfering in their without crossing boundaries, like without crossing ethical boundaries as such? Like there should be like there's lots of rumors around Facebook and their type of analysis that they do on their users. So what is the ethical side of it? Like how can we be, as product managers, be on the right side and the ethical side of it? But we need to do the analysis as well.
Right. I think the first step is recognizing that there are ethical implications to understanding the audience, because the ways that you ask questions and who you ask the questions of are going to determine the outcome. And so having a mindset around how you even structure those activities is going to help with the assurance that ethical standards are being considered, right? And so each project is going to be different. Each product manager is going to have different ways to do it. And they're probably going to have different channels open to be able to help understand the audience. And so some of that may be in the form of surveys. Some of that may be in the form of events where you have the public come in and discuss certain topics. Some of that may be feedback that you get from people in the field who are talking to different people and be able to give you a feedback loop to be able to understand, what it is that's important to people. So I don't think there's any one way to do it. I think there are a lot of ways to do it, and having that mindset that it's going to be important to understand the users and knowing that there are just going to be various and different tools to do that. A lot of organizations really lean on analytics, and I think analytics by themselves are not the answer. I think that they are very important, and I think people need to learn to use data, but I think analytics can really tell anything that anybody feels like they could tell, depending on what data is being analyzed. So I think there needs to be like a broad, holistic understanding of who your audience is, and then how you find them to be able to ask and get questions answered from them. That might be kind of a rambly answer, but.
Ma'am, I have a question. So during your presentation, you said the main purpose of design thinking is to develop empathy. Now, if we are to say interview somebody, but they aren't going to be as open or as willing to speak about their issues, so how would you suggest that we approach such a person or such a community, and in order to understand what they're going through, and then kind of build on that and work on it while using design thinking?
There are a lot of techniques that are evident in the design thinking process, and there are a lot of different organizations. The Stanford Design School, the D School, has a lot of tools and techniques that people can use to help you, because you're right, you can't expect to just walk up to somebody and say, hey, tell me about your problems. And we use a variety of them in class so that students can get practice talking to people. Now, of course, they're probably talking to other college students or their friends or their family, and so it makes it a little easier for them. But one of the techniques that we have used is called the 5 whys. And when you ask somebody about a question, why are you having trouble sleeping at night? They may give you an answer that's like, oh, I'm really stressed out. And if you stop at that, you're probably not going to get to the heart of the answer. So if you can continue to ask why 5 times without being annoying, because that's the hard part, but you can say, oh, why are you stressed out? Well, I'm just really busy. Okay, it stops there. You still don't know. Well, why are you so busy all of a sudden? And you keep asking those questions till you can get to the heart of it, when they're like, maybe in this particular case, they have just had a baby and the baby's keeping them up at night, or they've had another sort of a family situation, or it's just finals they're busy with, or other types of stressful things. But until you get to that 5th why, or 6th or 7th even, you're still stuck on the I'm just busy, I'm just tired answer. So it is a lot of emotional intelligence that has to be brought into these interviews, because again, you don't want to annoy people with this like a little kid, like why, I'm going to ask you 5 times why. You have to have a reason to ask the why, and then get deeper and deeper into what that problem is. And then once you've identified the problem, and again, this is, may or may not reveal, the example that I gave may or may not reveal a product that a media organization would create, but it could reveal a product that another company would create, like, an alarm on an iPhone or something like that, right? Like being able to really understand those kinds of needs. And then if you see those same things cropping up in different interviews and different experiences, it's like, how do we help solve that problem? It's like they might not be telling you how to solve the problem, but if you're hearing that same problem over and over again, it's like, that might be a problem in our local community, or that might be a bigger problem. Just start asking people. I ask students, what keeps you up at night? What is bothering you about your world right now? And I have them interview each other. Sometimes it's very common things: mental health, parking on campus, problems with roommates. These are things that come up all the time. Sometimes they're very specific things that are happening with that person, but when we start seeing the trends People are very concerned about misinformation. They're stressed out about the election. You know, these are things that once you see them over and over again in that environment, you might be able to say, what can we develop that would solve that problem? They don't all have to be stellar $1 million ideas. Like sometimes you go down a path, it's like, nah, you know, we thought about it. That's not going to be the way to go. But at least you're iterating, you're looking at users' needs, you are brainstorming solutions, and you're iterating through the solutions and getting some feedback before you've done the whole process. So I think you know, that's just one technique, but I think there are a lot of techniques that can help you better understand an audience.
Thank you, ma'am.
Jyoti? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, it was a great session. I just wanted to clarify one thing, that as I understood, product management is about integrating patterns of users' behavior of interaction with the content and integrating that into every stage of the product development, right? So when it is applied to journalism, even before the story is reported, the ground reporter should be mindful of the business aspect of the story. My only concern is about stories which which have very significant social implications, but it is not something that my user, like it is talking about a group, say the voice of the marginalized, and the user base of my content is not somebody who would like to listen to the story, at least at first instance. Maybe with repeated iterations, they might be more open to that story. But if the ground reporter is also concerned with if the story would do well later, and that becomes a parameter for even reporting the story, wouldn't that lead to like social issues?
I mean, I think you're bringing up a lot of the concerns and issues that media organizations are going to need to deal with. I mentioned the use of analytics, and quite often if a company is just really focused on clicks or page views, then it's going to affect the reporter in terms of what they might cover. And so that is, you know, maybe not as holistic or as helpful to the long term to just be looking at that one analytic. So I think leadership and media companies need to be mindful of the ways in which they are measuring all their employees, because whatever they measure is what they're going to do, right? And so if they feel like they need to be posting on certain social media channels, they need to be covering things in certain aspects, then they're going to get that kind of reportage. And that is a very important strategic question that media organizations need to consider. Now, I know that we hear a lot these days about having reporters and editors have a better understanding of the business of media so that they can better do their jobs. It used to be that very firm wall between the business side and the editorial side, and that is getting a little bit blurry as they start to think about the ways in which journalism needs to become sustainable. So I don't think that it needs to be 100% break the wall down and do everything for the sake of the business in the short term. I think it obviously needs a long-term approach with a lot of a strategic direction and some understanding of what some empathy about what the business side's goals are as reporters are thinking about the things that they should cover. But if you get to the point where you're thinking about what the audience needs, what the user needs, and if that's the thing that's going to drive the sustainability, then it's not just the revenue that's driving it. It is what are the user needs in your community as you craft and define them. The example again, the 19th is an organization here in Austin. They're very focused on policies affecting women. And that's going to be a very different kind of conversation that they're having with funders and their business side than what the Texas Tribune is having. Very similar, talking about the politics of Texas, but not necessarily with that female focus. And so it has to do with your mission, what you hope to accomplish with your organization, and what those goals are, and they need to be holistically approached. So I hope this is answering your questions, because none of these are easy.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. None of these are very easy answers. These are all things, as I said, that media organizations are grappling with now, and that many, many, many of you will be grappling with yourselves in the future. You'll be leading products and have to be able to answer these questions and be mindful and insightful of what's happening.
Yeah, Mayuri? Yeah.
My question is actually quite similar to that. So I find it very interesting that you're working in journalistic product development with a background in business. So I think the key to making a successful product is one that makes the user come back to it over and over again. And that is a mindset that is not common among somebody who is practicing journalism as such. So as someone who comes from a similar background, I want to ask you, how can we as aspiring journalistic product managers reconcile marketing mindset with a journalistic mindset?
Yeah, I mean, that is very similar to what we just talked about, right? And so I think when you look at the different products that might be able to attract different audiences and look at that as like a portfolio of offerings for the company, then you start to see where the opportunities are in that space. When you look at the New York Times with the cooking app, that app is not meant to convey the journalism that their website and their regular app does. And so they have a very specific angle for that that has a revenue model associated with it. And they have other things. They have podcasts that have advertising on it. So they, have different angles. Like they have the daily, so they do different things with that. Even on the Washington Post, the guy has the TikTok on the Washington Post. I don't know if you all have seen it, but it's hilarious. It gets the Washington Post brand in front of young people who don't care about the Washington Post, but now suddenly it's like, oh, that funny guy from the Washington Post. He's got the paper on his head or he's standing in front of the logo. And all of these are strategic business decisions being made that can, as you said, bring an audience back to one or all of your products in different ways. And so I think you have the right perspective coming into a job like this because you already realize it's the repeat. And it's not the repeat just for the sake of the repeat. It's the repeat engagement that the audience desires. Think about social media. I'm not sure if you all still use Facebook, if you're on Instagram or Snapchat. You're on that every day and you're looking at it multiple times a day. They have figured out how to get people to return. Media organizations would love that. So they need to figure out the same kind of processes without the addiction that many of us feel, right? And some of the problems associated with social media. But if they could get some of that into the routine and get, return visitors, that's going to allow them to be more sustainable and hopefully meet the needs of their audience better.
Yeah, Cindy, I have to ask you, how long do you have? I'm sorry, just apologies for holding you back for so long.
I can talk as long as you need to, but I'm sure you have a class time. So the sun is up now. I'm probably going to sit on my porch when we're done and figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of the day.
Yes.
But
any last questions? Yeah. Two questions. Can you take two questions more, Cindy?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So you mentioned data visualizing, and I was wondering that as someone who's come from a non-tech background, come from journalism, how can we develop those skills to get into that?
That's an excellent question. There are a lot of different platforms that help people do data visualizations, either something like Tableau or I like Flourish, that are very easy to get data into and be able to start working with different kinds of charts and graphs and add some interactivity to it. So Flourish is free. I would say just start playing with it. Find a data set that interests you and dig into it to kind of see what the trends are. It doesn't have to be an extensive data set. It could be something that just has maybe 2 or 3 variables in it that have to do with something in your community, and then figure out what the best way is to visualize that. I'm doing it now with my research. I did this entire survey and I'm going through the data. I can't show every single interaction between all these variables. I'm trying to figure out what the most interesting interactions are and how I want to visualize those things. And so it just takes a lot of time of just looking like, okay, that gender thing is not a thing. That's okay. That's pretty even. Oh, but look at the difference in the ages here. or look at the difference in the ethnicity. And then I have to figure out what's the best way to demonstrate that with the visualization. With all of this stuff, there are plenty of tutorials of all kinds across the web. YouTube is the best teacher right now. And so anything that you need, you just Google it. Like, remember I said my student was a professional Googler? You Google it. This is how I learn new things. I have a list now on my sabbatical. Once I get my research underway, I've got like 6 things I want to learn this semester. I'm going to learn that by watching videos. There's LinkedIn Learning. It used to be lynda.com, LinkedIn Learning. Yeah, that's a gold mine if you have access to that. Even if you just pay for 1 month of it, it's really, really worth it to go through some of those classes. And, you know, there's just no limit on what you can learn. So if for whatever reason your program is not teaching it to you, you can still learn it. And, you know, just there's many things to learn, so don't get too overwhelmed. Start somewhere and, you know, pick something and try to dig into it.
One last question, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Who wants to go?
So can I follow up?
Yeah, please go
Okay,
ahead.
is there someone else? Okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
So, ma'am, yeah. So now there's also requirements for Python and I can't remember the other one as well, right? So do you think?
R.
Right.
R.
So do you think even those could be learned, like absorbed like that?
Yes. I mean, all this is yes. It's a lot of new things to learn and to think about. And it may be stuff that you learn on the job. So maybe you have experience with some JavaScript and you're able to show an employer that you did a project that demonstrates some programming logic. And they'll be like, oh, if you know that, then you can come on here and we'll teach you what you need to know with Python of how we do this. So you can't really know everything, but it doesn't hurt to try to learn things that are applicable to what you're doing. So the first thing is to figure out what is the tool that I need to use to be able to do this, and then use that tool. So, you know, whether it's Python or R, or if you're learning another language or another framework, I think the best thing for you to do is think about what you want to learn first and why, and then just start with one thing.
Okay, thank you so much, Cindy. It's been
I want to ask one question before we go, because I know you have the little hand reaction. How many of you think you will want to work in a product position in the future? So either raise your actual hand or use the little reaction hand that's in your thing. So I've got some thumbs here, few hands. I want to see everyone. Because product management is the new journalism, and you're all going to be exposed to these topics as you move into your careers. And I think probably like in the US, many of you will work in journalism, and many of you may not even work in journalism, but these skills will also be valuable in many, many other types of organizations and careers. So I wish you all luck. And I hope you'll stay in touch. I think many of you have found me on social media, so please keep in touch and let me know about the things that you're working on.
Yeah,
sure. Just a small question, not a question, just a requirement. Could you please send us the presentation if it's possible, ma'am?
Yes, I'll send it to your professor. And can you share that, Badras?
Sure.
Because I could put it in the chat, but I think the chat will go away when I leave, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, I'll email it and you can share that. And I can even put it online as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Cindy, and have a nice day. And
okay,
happy
thank you.
Voting.
Okay, yes, that's what I might do that today.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all.